Mr Speaker, given the absolute embarrassment to this government over recent events with ACC, the controversy, the heartache and the absolutely shameful behaviour by the government, I am absolutely amazed that they are choosing this time to pursue the progress of this shocking bill through this House. It is just absolutely unbelievable. This bill is very clearly part of this government's deliberate campaign to strip the entitlements. To strip the entitlements, Mr Speaker, to raise the levies and set up ACC in the future to flog off to the highest bidder. All the rhetoric is there, all the rhetoric about, you know, how difficult it is. We listen to the Minister drone on and on and on and on about how difficult things are financially. As my colleague Marianne Street said, what was it? What was the tissue line? A tissue of half-truths that actually, in some way, on the government's part, want to validate this harsh attack on the rights of entitlements of New Zealanders. This bill, Mr Speaker, should not have ever passed its first reading. It did so with the government getting support from the ACT Party, no surprise, Peter Dunn, no surprise, but also from the Maori Party. That enabled this bill to progress to Select Committee. What a proud moment it would have been, Mr Speaker, if people in this House had said, look, this is just not fair. I'm not talking about the National Party, but I'm talking about other members, other parties in this House, who said we uphold a principle of fairness. This is an attack on the very fabric of our society and everything that we as New Zealanders hold dear. Our ACC scheme that has put us up there on the world stage, that has been admired by every country in the world. And we have a government that is hell-bent on dismantling it. I want to pay tribute to the Labour members and the Green member on the Select Committee. They were the ones who had the guts, who actually looked at the issues, who opposed the bill, and they opposed the bill for the right reasons. They opposed the bill because it wasn't just and it wasn't fair. But it's a numbers game, and because of the numbers, this bill came back to the House unimproved, and it was for all the wrong reasons. There was no improvements whatsoever to this bill. There was no, and I heard the previous Speaker, David Bennett, stand in this House and thank the submitters for coming to the Select Committee. Thank you, he said. We appreciate the submitters. I actually think the best way to thank submitters for when they come to the Select Committee and front up is to actually listen to them, listen to what they're saying, listen to what New Zealanders are saying, listen to what the people said in the rally outside, and say, quite honestly, as John Key says, sometimes we don't always get it right, and this is one of them. But that is not what happened. So I think, Mr Bennett, to stand up and thank the submitters really just smacks of cynicism. It sucks, as it's a slap in the face, and it sucks, as my eloquent colleagues say. But we've already seen cuts to the entitlement right across New Zealand, from physical injuries and also including victims and survivors of sexual assault. Now, I do want to pay tribute to some of the submitters who did go along, and they talked about what has happened to victims and survivors of sexual assault, the absolute denial of claims, the languishing on waiting lists, the no treatment, the being told that that counselling won't help you despite every professional in the business saying that it will. All of these things, and people having the courage to go to that committee. Now, sadly, that was outside the scope of the bill, but I still want to acknowledge those people, and I still say to this government, that is the most appalling action in the whole of ACC that you have taken, and you must fix it. In terms of when we went to the rally, we heard what so many people did. The National National Party, who want to know about ACC, who, if they'd fronted up at the rally the other day, on Tuesday, they would have heard really clearly. Yes, where there were 2,000 people, my colleague says. There were tons and tons of people. If they had fronted up, then they would have heard that people are being pushed for a post, they're kept waiting for decisions, and whether they will be able to have the ability to be treated, to return to work, to lead an active life, or to receive counselling when they deserve it, which is so necessary for people who have experienced such horrific abuse. But did the National Party turn up out there and listen? No, they did not. They didn't. Did Nick Smith say, well, I can't make it, can somebody go? No, they did not. They did not listen to the people. Nick Smith continues in his address today with the argument that ACC is struggling financially and will not be viable unless this bill is passed. We are already seeing the underhand cuts that I talked about before and the stress that they are causing right throughout our communities in New Zealand. This minister hides behind ACC when it is very clear from the numbers that are coming through that it is all part of the national government's pay more, get less agenda.
That's right.
This bill, by the government's minister's own admission, is actually about cost cutting. And the reality is that ACC's liabilities exceeded the assets. That's the reality. In terms, or assets exceeded the liabilities. I was looking for that response, Mr. Minister. PricewaterhouseCoopers found New Zealanders' ACC costs were lower than any other scheme. Independent review, which this minister says is so good. I want to actually also talk about Treasury itself said they were unsure that ACC was excessive. All of this evidence, but this minister is hell-bent on putting the message out with his half-truths that ACC is in trouble. I also want to talk about some more victims, and they are victims of the ACC changes, and that is the ready for work at 30 rather than 35 hours. Now, we all know that 30 hours is not a living wage, and we know the stats are that when people are deemed ready to go back to work, that's not the case. 32% who are deemed to be back to work are back in work, 21% were part-time, and 22.5% were on a work and income benefit. So that, Mr. Speaker, shows that these swamp dwellers, if we can use that term that ACC talk about, it's not working for them under the 35 hours return to work, so the 30 hours is absolutely terrible. The final point I want to talk about is two final points. Firstly, that we all know that in this situation it is disabled people and it is women that we have heard about in this House today who, in terms of the pay and entitlements, are languishing behind. They are going to be by far the people who are affected the most by this cuts. And I also want to talk about the hearing loss. This government, make no mistake, under ACC, the only reason people have assistance with a hearing aid is when they require it for hearing loss. The changes that this government is imposing under the pretext that it is consistent with Australia, which is simply not true. In Australia, if people need hearing aids, they get them. It is saying the level must be 6%. I agree with the Human Rights Commission. I agree with health professionals that this is going to really disadvantage hearing impaired people in New Zealand, and it is completely in line with what this government is doing to deaf and hearing impaired people, with the loss of sign language classes through the adult and community education cuts, and the cuts in support for tertiary deaf students, and also the support for through teachers for children and their parents. That is this ACC cut to people who have hearing impairment is absolutely consistent with that agenda, Mr. Speaker, and I find that after ratifying a United Nations Convention on the Rights of